Fort Anne is a four-star fort built to protect the harbour of Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia. The fort repelled all French attacks during the early stages of King George's War. Now designated a National Historic Site of Canada, it is managed by Parks Canada. The 1797 officers' quarters was renovated in the 1930s and now house the museum with exhibits about the fort's history and historic artifacts from the area. A half-a-kilometre trail runs along the fort's earthen walls and provides a view of the Annapolis River and basin. History. The site has been fortified since 1629, when the Scots came to colonize Nova Scotia and built Charles Fort. The region was reverted to French control in the 1630s and Charles.The. only began work on the first of four forts on the same site, then known as Port Royal. In 1702, the French began construction of the current Vauban earthwork that is found there today. Queen Anne's War. During Queen Anne's War, the fort fell to British New England troops after a week-long siege in 1710, which marked the British conquest of Acadia. A British governor and garrison replaced the French at the fort, renaming the Port Royal settlement Annapolis Royal after Queen Anne. With the Treaty of Utrecht 3 years later, the British gained full control of mainland Nova Scotia and kept Annapolis Royal as the capital until the founding of Halifax in 1749. The 40th Regiment of Foot was raised at Fort Anne in 1717. Father Rail's War. Blockade of Annapolis Royal. During Father Rail's War, in July 1722, the Abenaki and Mi'kmaq attempted to create a blockade of Annapolis Royal, with the intent of starving the capital. The natives captured 18 fishing vessels and prisoners from present-day Yarmouth to Cansa. They also seized prisoners and vessels from the Bay of Fundy. In response to the New England attack on Father Rail at Norridgewock in March 1722, 165 Mi'kmaq and Maliseet troops gathered at Minas to lay siege to the Lt. Governor of Nova Scotia at Annapolis Royal. Under potential siege in May 1722, Lieutenant Governor John Doucet took 22 Mi'kmaq hostage at Annapolis Royal to prevent the capital from being attacked. Massachusetts Governor Samuel Shute declared war on the Abenaki. New Englanders retrieved some of the vessels and prisoners after the battle at Winnipeg, in which 35 natives and 5 New Englanders were killed. Other vessels and prisoners were retrieved at Malagash Harbour after a ransom was paid. Raid on Annapolis Royal. During Father Rail's War, the worst moment of the war for the capital came in early July 1724, when a group of 60 Micmac and Maliseets raided Annapolis Royal. They killed and scalped a sergeant and a private, wounded 4 more soldiers, and terrorized the village. They also burned houses and took prisoners. The British responded on July 8 by executing one of the Mi'kmaq hostages on the same spot the sergeant was killed. They also burned 3 Acadian houses in retaliation. As a result of the raid, 3 blockhouses were built to protect the town. The Acadian church was moved closer to the fort so that it could be more easily monitored. King George's War. During King George's War, the French launched 3 expeditions against the capital to regain the fort with no success, the most famous being the Dunctonville expedition. Father Le Loutre's War. During Father Le Loutre's War, the capital of Acadia was moved from Annapolis Royal to Halifax. Fort Edward, Fort Lawrence and Fort Anne were all supplied by and dependent on the arrival of Captains Cobb, Rogers at Taggart, in one of the government sloops. These vessels took the annual or semi-annual relief to the destination. They carried the officers and the families to and fro, as required. On the 15th of August 1752, Commander John Handfield, Esq., widower, married Miss Mary Handfield. French and Indian War. During the French and Indian War, the British engaged in the Bay of Fundy campaign and deported the Acadians living in the area. With the fall of Quebec in 1759, the fort no longer held the same military importance. It was, however, still used as an outpost during the American Revolution, where the 84th Regiment of Foot was stationed, and the War of 1812 in defense of the town from American privateers. The fort acquired the name Fort Anne in the 19th century. Commanding officers: John Doucet, Lawrence Armstrong, Alexander Cosby, Paul Mascarene, Henry Daniel, John Hanfield. Fort Anne National Historic Site. In 1917, Fort Anne was acquired by the Dominion Parks branch, the predecessor of Parks Canada, and designated the second National Historic Park, bearing the name Fort Anne National Park. 2 years later, a new program of National Historic Sites was established in 1919 to replace the incipient system of historic parks, and Fort Anne was designated a National Historic Site in 1920. Although Fort Anne was neither the first National Historic Park, nor was it the first site designated under the replacement National Historic Site program, it is nonetheless sometimes referred to as Canada's first National Historic Site, or the first administered National Historic Site, because it was the first site acquired by the federal government for national historic purposes that has subsequently remained under Parks Canada administration. Legacy. On 28 June 1985, Canada Post issued Fort Anne NS circa 1763, one of the 20 stamps in the Forts Across Canada series. The stamps are perforated 12.5 x 13 and were printed by Ashton Potter Limited based on the designs by Rolf P. Harder.